Hey, everybody. This is Mark Stoos with Accelerating Value, the weekly podcast that explores all the different aspects of value creation, what you need to do to create it, what you need to do to defend it, to prove it out, how you see it at different points in your career, how you see it versus other people on your team, right? How do you close those gaps? All that kind of stuff is stuff that we cover. Today, we have a really primo guest, right? I mean, there are guests, and then there are guests that are known by a single name. So kind of like Madonna or Bono, right? So if you know anything about marketing and you don't know the name Sangram Vajre, then I would submit that there's some remedial work that you need to do.
Well, either that or, people just could never pronounce my last name right. So they just dropped it and just kept going with the first name.
Right. No, I think hey, I suffer with the same problem. I mean, there's endless versions of my last name, right?
Yeah.
But you also are blessed with a very distinctive first name. Right, particularly in the American market, right?
Yeah.
And so between that and kind of your persona, who you are, what you've done with it, right? I actually do think, all joking aside, that most people in marketing would, if you said the name Sangram, they're only referring to you.
Well, maybe not that many Sangrams in the marketing world, but on the name part, it's interesting. My son and I, Mark. He was like, well, why is our name, like, his name is Krish and last name is Vajre, right? So it's like, so what does it mean? And I'm like, well, let's just Google it. And we Googled it. So people can Google this thing. And an English meaning of this word is kind of fascinating. I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but the English meaning of Sangram is lightning, apparently.
I believe that. That's very apt.
Yeah, and well, you think about that, and then the last name Vajre means bolt, so it's a lightning bolt. And my son was so fired up after that conversation. He loves his name now more than anything.
No, that's awesome. I think that as people already, as any of our viewers are picking up, if they've never seen you before. Right. I mean, part of what makes you special is that you have a rather electric presence, right? And when you're on stage or you're in person or you're on a podcast, that really comes through. And I think that people also, one of the things that people say about you a lot is that part of the value that you bring is that they can tell that you really care about them. Personally, even if you're talking to a group of 500 people, right, that it's a very personal experience with you. So let's start there, right?
Yeah.
How do you are kind of a media personality. You get around, you're on a lot of podcasts, you're on a lot of stages, maybe not so much in the last year, but certainly before.
A lot of Zooms,
right? If there's anybody who's going to have Zoom fatigue, it's going to be you, right?
I definitely do.
So how do you transmit value in your own mind as you're interacting with audiences? How do you transmit value not just to this amorphous group of people, but to individuals? How do you connect, particularly given all the filters that we have to deal with?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark. And again, thank you for saying everything you said. I would definitely mail you the check later on for this podcast. Sometime back, I heard, and this is really true in the church world, which is you gotta put the person in your mind before you walk on the stage, right? So for me, I always think about who is this presentation for? And I would start kind of just forming them in my head. This is for Joe, this is for Jill, and they're like 32-year-old marketer who are just trying to get through the day, and they're stuck in leads and they're frustrated. So I would like literally gear up my frustration and almost get into that persona of his and I just speak to that one person in my head. So that allows me to just hopefully be as emotionally connected with that one person. And if the audience is right, if I'm in the right room, that's typically connects with everybody, because some of that has what either they have experienced before or they're experiencing right now, or they can tell that they're going to experience pretty soon. So it allows me to just walk into their life for a moment and be with them as if I'm there, and then bring them out like, hey, look, it's not gloom and doom. It's like there is a better way, there is a better future, there is a better promised land. And that allows me to then take them on a journey with me in that conversation. But that initial moment of recognizing not that I'm on the stage and that makes me special, versus I'm right there with you sitting in the seats and feeling the pain as you do, is a very important moment of any presentation, any conversation. So like, right now when people are listening to this, I think you and I are both trying to get them to recognize that, look, everyone has value to give.
Absolutely.
And everyone has value to receive. And in that exchange of value is really where great legacies are created, great conversations are created. And it takes a moment for you to recognize that you have value and they have value. And this is purely like, a blessing that we get to do that.
How much of your ability to do that today do you feel like is stuff that you have learned, either the easy way or the hard way, versus who you are intrinsically? Understanding that it's always both and.
Yeah.
Right?
It took me a while to just literally accept that as a gift, quite frankly. In the early days, I felt like it was necessary, right? We were building a business. I had to be out there talking about if I didn't feel the passion and I didn't create all the things that I created, we wouldn't have a business to run. So to me, it was as necessity. That is what it is. But after some point, it was not necessary for me to do it. And then I did reach a point where I was like, so now am I just doing this for ego? Or am I like loving this thing? Or am I just narcissist about myself that I am the most important person in the room? What is it? Because you get to that point where you just recognize that you did what you needed to do, but you don't need to do it anymore. Or you actually have done so much of it that you get really good at it. And now it's a choice that you need to figure out, like, is that really what it is? Because that's not what I thought. If you ask my parents, they would be like, man, that guy failed 3 times in English and he's writing 3 books. It doesn't equate. It doesn't match up. So what to your question is like, did you become that? I feel like I did become some of my own creation of sorts. And it took me a while, honestly, almost a therapy session, if you will,
right.
of recognizing,
yeah.
is this me or is this somebody else? Like I had to have that moment of conversation with myself and my wife, and like, is this me or is this a two-faced person, like just trying to do something that I'm not? And the reality is, like, all the things that you're talking about is like, am I able to connect with people at scale, even in a room of 500 or 3,000? And I realized that I've always told stories when I'm presenting marketing. Like I hardly have presented anything without my personal family story. Like you have seen some of those presentations.
Yeah.
I talk about my kids. I talk about my wife. I talk about the relation. So to me, I found a voice is like, this is how I can be authentic of who I am.
Yeah.
I'm not someone who would just go and like, here is the big framework in the world and the world of business is going to change, without actually telling a personal story, because that is such a big part of who I am. So I feel like I've just found a way for me to be me by connecting the dots. Like I'm just another guy. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, and I got a ton of things going on that it's not perfect. And I'm learning how to be a great dad. I'm learning how to be a great husband. But that is not different than learning to be a great marketer. And somehow I try to connect the dots there. And again, that's another way to just connect to the audience in the room. So what I've become, and the value, going back to the value conversation, that I feel like is that it took me almost a year, Mark, to realize that it's a gift. And if I don't continue to focus on it and harness on it, it's just, it will be a wasted gift. So why not use it?
Do you find today that it's easier for you to do that in large groups or one-on-one?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. It's I was talking to one of the folks, I think it was yesterday, late last night, about this exact thing. He's like, hey, there are like these 8 or 9 CEOs and founders. They would love for you to be one-on-one, mentor them on one-on-one. And I said, I can't. Like, it will suck the day life out of me. And it sounded very weird to even say that, but I just quickly recognized that's just not what would give me energy. And over a period of time, the money would be good, the opportunity would be fun, but it's not something that will give me energy. What I would rather do is almost create a mastermind and bring these 8 people together, have the community feel in it, let them all learn from each other, because I very quickly get, what else am I going to say to them? Like, they're going to figure out I got nothing more than what I've said before. So I have maybe an insecurity of myself in a sense. I'm like, but if I put these 10 people together and actually challenge and help them all to grow together, at the end of the year, we'll actually have a better outcome than they all individually just spending time with me.
Plus, it changes the dynamic completely when you start doing that, right?
Yeah, it's a multiplier effect. In many ways. I think at one-on-one, I can only do so much, and I may do that for some really, really, really like deeper conversations that somebody wants to have. Like you and I have had really deep conversations. It makes sense, but I can't have that level of conversation with every single person. It would just not give me energy, and I don't think I'll add that much value to their life. After a certain, like maybe 3 people or 4 people, I'm like done. I got nothing.
Yeah, it's a great point. A long time ago, I was pretty active in presidential politics and things like that, right? And worked with a lot of politicians at the operating mainly at the national and state levels, and without exception, the same was true for them, right? They either were pure magic in small groups or one-on-one, and kind of did yeoman-like service to large crowds, right? But kind of generally uninspiring, right? Mm-hmm. Or they were the inversion of that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it is very, very difficult to be both, particularly if you are doing a lot of it and you're pouring yourself out in front of large groups. The same could be true, by the way, in the reverse. A good friend of mine is a pretty well-known life coach who still is in private practice, and he limits his big on-stage stuff because the personal part of what he does requires almost all the energy he has.
Yeah,
right.
It does, and in many ways, it is an energy equation of sorts. Right. But I think you and I both know Andy Stanley, and he talked about this thought of like for you need to like you don't know if you can ever fill somebody's cup, but you can always make sure that you empty your cup into their life. And I feel it's a really important statement to think about it. At the same time, if your cup is empty, then you have to go to somebody else to fill it. So you better not run dry. So I'm like, you didn't finish that thought, Andy. Yeah. Like, what do you do when you run out of water? Like, what do you do? And I think that's what happens to a lot of us. And I think it's a problem of saying yes to too many things and not recognizing that your yes is actually not adding value anymore. It's negative. I will give you a great example, Mark. Like, I remember in the early days of Terminus, I walked in a meeting, and you mentioned this. Like, I think my default state is high energy, and then after that, I don't know what I got, but that's what I am. Like, I want to walk in, and I don't have to artificially pump myself up. I just walk in with that because I'm excited to meet people and have conversation. It gets me going. The longer I'm actually get more energized because I get energy from conversations. So I walk into this team meeting, and at that day, for whatever reason, I was flat. I was literally flat. It was like a gas came out of every, a big vehicle, and there's nothing left. And I just walked into the meeting and And I sat as if I sank in the seat. And I sat there, and it was an executive meeting. And I didn't realize at the end of those 20, 25 minutes, the entire energy of the room became flat, because I would bring in so much energy to the excitement to what we're trying to do and stuff, that I realized that now I'm actually doing the opposite of it, because people expected me to have energy. And when I walked in, the way I walk in, the way I grab it, the way I hug people, I bring a certain amount of energy. So when I didn't do that and I walked in that meeting, I would have been better off canceling that meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was a negative that day for the very thing that I'm good at. So I think I realized that day is like, I would never again walk in a meeting like that, like empty glassed, because if people expect me to fill their glass, I need to have my glass full. And there are days when they're not, and I would rather have no meeting that day because it doesn't add value to anything.
Yeah, it actually is, a highly personal take on resource allocation versus value creation, right? Which is what we all deal with professionally all the time, right? I also think that, a side point to all this is, so my wife is a lot like you, right? So Debbie is a true extrovert, okay? And basically the way I've learned to explain this to people is that if she and I go to a party, she will exit the party at 1 a.m. far more energized than when she arrived.
Yeah.
And I joke around with her that she's really an energy parasite, right? Because she basically drains everybody else, right? And she's like a vampire, right? And whereas I am a person that I recharge by being by myself. Mm-hmm. And what you see today in terms of what appears to be Mark Stuess, the extrovert, it is true, right? I have become that. So just like what you were talking about earlier, how you've sort of grown into what might have started out as a persona, right, has become you. Same thing for me. I've learned how to be an extrovert so well that I, in some ways, really am one today, because it's not like I sit here and fake it, right? But I don't. But like at 1 a.m. when we leave that party, I'm just like freaking poured out on the ground, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I just have literally nothing more to give.
Yeah.
Right.
It is, but that's what makes your relationship probably fun, because if you had two introverts, they both would be looking outside the window and not, out of one would actually take the other person out, like, hey, just stop looking, let's just go out. And I think that's what probably makes
I'll tell you what, that's true, except for one moment, and that's 1 a.m.
That is good. Yeah. After 1 a.m.
Yeah, that's what she's ready to woo, right? And I'm just like, so yeah, so let's talk about that, right? Because that's actually, whether you're talking about relationships or whether you're talking about a business decision, right? Figuring out how to spend a limited resource for maximum impact, for maximum value. Understanding that there's always elements to the equation in both situations, in all situations, that you don't control and that you might not even know about ever, right?
Yeah.
How do you think about that today? Like, you could kind of shorthand this question as prioritization, right? But it's more than just that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, to me, I still think about everything I do as a multiplier effect, and I try to use that as a lens for everything. So, for example, throughout the day, if we look at our calendars today, they're crazy. Everyone's calendar is crazy. We have less time, but everybody has the same amount of time. So what allows me to be a founder of a fast-growing company like Terminus, at the same time build a community like Peak, and then write book, if you look at it, you're like, oh, that's crazy. And then do a daily podcast, and then you start adding things to be on boards. The chances of me being able to effectively do that, all of it, would be slim to none. But I think what I've learned is that, well, you know what? Let's figure out a way to do what I do best, what I have the most value creation part of it, and really just do that. And everything else absolutely have to be delegated. Case in point, podcast. I do nothing other than have great conversations, and I'm from day one, never even from day one, I said I'm going to outsource everything from writing a blog around it, creating graphics around it, audio engineering, video engineering, all that stuff. We gave it to Sweetfish Media from day one because I knew that's not going to be my thing. And I've seen a lot of amazing creators spend a ton of time doing all that stuff. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you remember, but Guy Kawasaki, like of all people in the world, he was on a live and he told me that, well, I take out ums and ahs. I'm like, why do you do that? He's like, well, I like it to be perfect, like a talk. I'm like, but it's the most forgiving channel in the world. It's a conversation. Yeah, when I have a conversation, I have ums and ahs. Why would I take that out? So he's like, man, that just saved me 8 hours a week. And I'm thinking, you're 8 hours a week as guy. I mean, it's got to be ridiculous.
That's a lot of value going down the tube, right?
You know, yeah. So he's like, I'm going to stop doing that, and it's recorded. It's on when I did that live with him, and I'm realizing that how many of us, it doesn't really matter what level you are, we all have the ability to figure out our lane of genius. Is how I phrase that and frame that. Is figure out your lane of genius, be really good at it, and do that. And everything else is outsourced. And what it will be humbling. It definitely was humbling to me. When I went down and said my lane of genius, it quickly shrunk to a couple of things. And so it's a humbling experience, but it's a good one because then you can recognize that these are my gifts, these are my choices, and everything every moment that I spend not on this, I'm giving up something that I think God has gifted us to give to the world. So when you start putting it in context, it starts to recognize it's a multiplying effect. What you're doing is now you're teaching somebody, like, I need you to do all podcasting stuff. When I'm doing the book writing, I'm not writing a single word. I'm audio talking about it. I have an editor who helps me put it all together. So it's my ideas, my concepts, but I'm not writing pen and paper. I just don't have the time. I need somebody to do it. And even if I had the time, I would be horrible at it. And it will be a book that will come in the next decade when the things are already over and out. So it won't make any sense. It won't be any gift to anybody. So it's a matter of prioritization. But to me, if I have to put a different lens on it, Mark, for people, is find your lane of genius, stick to it, and figure out how you can get everything else that's not in your lane of genius for others to lead and take it forward.
Absolutely. No, I think that speaking as a startup founder and CEO, right, one of the things that you have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that you also really realize, if you haven't already realized it earlier in your career, is that your success is inextricably bound up in the contributions of everyone else around you. And that, in fact, outside of that area of genius that you contribute, right, most of the success is somebody else's contribution, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
I mean, leadership by definition is in many ways, I don't know if it's been defined anywhere or not, but I always looked at leadership as by definition is how do you help other people to get stuff done? I mean, that's pretty much it. And that means you're not doing it. And it sounds, initially I used to think that was a cop-out, but I think no, it's not a cop-out. It's actually the way you need to do. So people feel fulfilled because they're good at it and they love that. And I would hate doing all the other things that I said I'm not good at, but a lot of people just try to do everything and get sucked into it.
Yeah, no, it's one of my big strengths is, I mean, calling yourself a polymath is sort of like not done, right? But if I had to, be honest for just a moment, right? That kind of skill set is very much me. Right. And so I used to think that the natural output of that was phenomenal ideas that were highly synergistic across seemingly unrelated topics, right? And that I was sort of like that seed planter, right? That architect. And then I came to the realization, which is sort of the way I operate today, that that my ability to synergize all this stuff should mean that I ask even better questions, right? That it's not my job to come up with the solution, right? It's my job as leader and CEO and all that kind of stuff, right? To ask my team really, really penetrating questions that not only, kind of reveal at a more discrete or tactical level, kind of like, advantages and disadvantages and all this kind of stuff, right? But to ask them questions that make them come up with a brilliant answer that maybe I would not have seen, right?
Yeah.
And that is really that's kind of very much the way I operate today, right? And I think that a lot of people who've known me for a long time kind of sort of wonder what has happened because for a lot of people I come across as much quieter and even more self-effacing in some respects versus maybe 10 years ago when I was anything but quiet and self-effacing, right?
Yeah.
And part of that I think is just what I feel like I've learned, setting aside business for a second, right? Just intrinsically about my own life and what I'm supposed to be in this world, right? But part of it also is my job is to get maximum leverage.
Yeah.
And to help other people deliver maximum leverage. And part of that is empowering them. And you don't really empower people by giving them a brilliant insight that you happen to have, right? You empower them by asking them, it's actually very Socratic. You ask them the right questions and it brings them to the right answer. I mean, this is another, Jesus certainly operated this way. Other people have operated this way, where they ask very provocative questions that make you kind of come to a conclusion that you might not otherwise have come to, right? So
yeah.
Yeah.
I do that with Krish sometimes. I would ask him like, well, so he's like, hey, Dad, this is what happened at school. He's 10. And also I used to tell him hey, that's not good or that's bad. Or like I literally would give him my reaction as a dad. And lately I think I've been like, so what do you think? What happened? So I'll just go on a series of these questions with him. After some point he's like, Dad, why are you asking me all these questions? But over the last year or two, Mark, I think he has learned to think critically. He has learned to understand, well, I know you're going to ask me, Dad, like, what I thought. So let me just tell you what I thought and here's what it is. So he would give me some of that. So he's now getting wired to just go through the process of thinking as opposed to me telling yes or no or whatnot. And I think a lot of times leadership gets limited with your responses to the people that work with you. So based on not only how great your questions are, but what kind of responses you have for them will actually turn into value creation. So I look at Krish as like, oh my God, this is a full-on experiment that every parent gets to have, like at their disposal. Oh, like, all right, this didn't work. All right, tomorrow I'm going to try something different. So, your kids are like, won't even remember what happened yesterday. So you get a little bit of a saving grace there. But that's what I'm learning is like, oh, the less I tell him what to do, the better our conversation become and the more thoughtful he's becoming in his ways of responding and thinking and acting towards it, and the less I have to tell him what to do, what not to do, because my job is not to tell him what to do for his life. My job is to prepare him to do what to do for the rest of it, like to have the discernment to it. So how do we add that at the leadership component level? Is the same thing, is like our job is to not tell people what to do, but to help them with the discernment of how you want to do it.
So then this is a perfect segue. Okay, so you've just touched on a couple of things, right? One of them is time lag, right? So you're putting seeds into your son that are going to germinate and grow and bloom at different rates across his life, right? And so, hopefully you'll be around to see some of that, but some of it is guaranteed to probably be outside of your own lifetime.
Yep.
Right? If for no other reason, then it gets passed on to his children and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
So there is this ripple effect, there is a time lag, and there is a need to monetize. We're going to use kind of a crass term, right? And I want everyone to know I'm using this very loosely. You can apply it to business, and you can also, there are other ways in relationships that things come to flower or monetize, right? How do you, so you mentioned all the different things that you're doing right now, right? These are all going to monetize at different rates.
Yep.
Right? So, for example, you have turned down these mentorship opportunities that probably would have brought in a lot of immediate cash. Yeah. You probably are limiting your board seat work for the same reason, right?
Yep.
And yet that comes at a near-term cost. How do you balance this in your own life? Right, and certainly relationally, but really in more hardcore kinds of terms, right? How do you balance the financial portfolio that you're essentially running?
Yeah, well, I think the time lag is a big factor to this. The portion that makes me wonder all the time is do I have the right end in mind? And you've probably heard this phrase, like, start with the end in mind. And I find myself asking this question more often than not. Do I have the right end in mind?
Right. And I feel free to revise that answer.
Right. Like, we have to. We have to.
Right.
And even me and my wife, Manmeet and I, we talked, but she's not fond of this idea. I'm like, we should write our own eulogy. Because it is going to help us think about it as we're going to writing our will for our kids, even though we're not hopefully we're not dying tomorrow, but we're in a process of writing our will. And we're like, one of the things I want to do is I want to write, what do I expect, or what do I dream? Rather, expect is a bad word. What do I dream for our family to be about? So for example, I think about every relationship, every conversation that I think about, like, well, my family is like a company where me and my wife are the co-founders of it, and we got a couple of budding high performers, coming out of our family. And so that means we got to have a vision statement. We got to have core values, just like any good business should have. So our vision statement is this: Vajres always make it through with God's love, grace, and truth. That's our vision statement. We came together as a family saying that that's what would be a great thing 20 years from now. If our kids and our family is known for the love that we have for each other and people around us, that we always show grace to others, that will be our first and foremost thing. But we would expect nothing but truth from each other. We don't need to lie. We don't need to beat around bushes. We just need to be honest with each other. If that happens, then it's a great legacy to leave. And we took time to think through that. And our love and grace and truth are our core values, so that kids can remember that. So I'm dumbfounded when I hear a lot of people like, oh, I never thought about it. We don't have a mission statement. And it sounds very marketing-y and very businessy. Right. But gosh, I'll tell you, Mark, it's the funnest thing to do with the kids. The funnest thing to do in a business is when you actually start a business and you get them rallied around the core values. Like at Terminus, we had one team and keys to the Ferrari. Those were our core values. It got people to think like we're a team. I don't say family, I say team. We're a team. Over there, you all have keys to the Ferrari, which means you get to drive as fast as you can. We trust you. You're in the driver's seat. So these things are super important. And the balance, there is, once you start putting words around it, it actually creates a wrapper that you can then look at and use that as a lens for every decision you make. So when Krish comes home,
it's a positioning exercise too.
Totally is. Totally.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it is the same thing for your business. It is the same thing for your life. And I'm like, I don't know two different. I feel like I've landed in the world of business somehow. So I'll take anything from business and apply it to my family. Maybe I should be doing the reverse. But I look at it as like, I can't have two different ways. Like if business is, this is how to run, I don't understand why a family financial statement and as a family will and a family wouldn't have a vision and core values. To me, we should. And I think the more I've done it as a family, the better I felt about, okay, now I understand. And at least we know what to work on. We know where we are stumbling, where we know where we need to re-energize and refocus.
Do you find that it bleeds back and forth? So, for example, right, we razz about my wife about this all the time. So, she's pretty senior in a large professional consultancy, right?
Yeah.
And I guess this was probably like 10 years ago. One morning, we were kind of getting all the kids ready, and I was getting ready to do my thing, and she was getting ready to do her thing. And she started talking about our deliverables. And it was a hilarious word choice because it was a total bleed out from her professional life into our family. Right? Here are your deliverables. This is, and you're like, deliverables, right? I don't have deliverables, right? In this context, right? Do you find that that there are
100%. I think there are things that you shouldn't do at all from a business world to like family. Like, so for example, when there's a problem that my wife would have at work, I would tell her like, oh, I got a 3-point formula to solve this problem that you have. Bad idea. All she wanted me is listen and not do that, right? So it was hard to like say, okay, that's bad idea. I shouldn't be doing that. This is my job here is to listen, be empathetic about it. She doesn't need a solution from me. So in many ways, there are big no-nos that you don't want to bring back. But there are big opportunities where you're like, that just helps. That just clarifies things. The worst thing that I'm seeing, Mark, of all things is that when we look at the idea that business is business and personal is personal, and then you look at the idea that no, business is personal, and I'm thinking about like, no, personal is business, right? Like there is that integration, as you say, about certain concepts that has crossover, and you will be better served if you can recognize what those are and play to the strengths that they bring to the relationship at work and even in your personal life. But I think we have erred too much around the fact that I took zero responsibility towards my home orientation and I take full responsibility at my work orientation. And then there's a tension there that requires a ton of attention.
So in both of these circumstances, based on what you've said today, I would say that your natural bias is towards a longer time horizon. Would that be true?
As long as possible. No dates, no timeline. It's like, this is like, it's almost as far as like, it's something that you would probably never achieve, but you will always be in a pursuit of, would be the way I would look at it.
And so how do you balance that with the requirement that you personally or your business or whatever has right now?
Well, there you go. That's one of the reasons I'm not in the operating role of the business. So I got other people in the operating who are thinking about this. Right. But this is a really good point, Mark, because it's one without the other would actually fail. And I hope more organizations do what I think we get to do right now. It's extremely hard, as you initially said, about trying to be both, trying to be operating excellence and then also almost evangelist, the way I think about my role. Mm-hmm. But both are important because both creates the right kind of business model. But imagine if all you did was operating side of the house, but not having this pain that you can carry through the customers where they felt that you understood their problem and had a long-term vision for something that exceeds everything operationally that you need to do that month or that quarter. You will always we all are always incented to fix what is in front of us as quickly as we can because we feel in control. And then everything that is outside, we feel it is out of control, out of sight. And I think thereby there's really important, if somebody could do both, amazing, all power to them. But typically you would have two people do that, and they respect each other's roles, they respect each other's ability to execute on those, and are looking forward to that healthy debates and healthy tension in the organization. So I get to be in board meetings, I get to be in our executive meeting talking about, well, that's great for the next quarter what we're doing in the product release, but I'm hearing from our customers that what they want in the future would be something like this. So why not we start looking at an acquisition that does that while we're doing that? Now that is not somebody who's in the day-to-day, who's trying to release a product feature next month is going to be thinking about. So there's a healthy relationship that can be brought into it, but it's hard. It's not easy.
Absolutely. Sangram, thank you so much. This has been everything that I thought it would be and more. And I'm sure that everyone that's listening to it is going to be kind of blown away by this conversation, just the way that it went. Right. So
I love it, man. It's nothing is scripted. It's all on the fly for us to just tell our hearts out. So thank you for letting it go in the direction it went.
No, absolutely. And for those of you who don't know this, the very first in-person conversation that Sangram and I ever had was in Montana at a marketing event. And we recorded another podcast that I used to do called Mega Value Live. And we did it outdoors, kind of right on the main drag in this town in Montana, and you could hear the occasional 18-wheeler go by and the Harley go by, and it was highly atmospheric.
Yes.
So what I'm going to do when we release this podcast is I'm going to have a link to that first one, right? And you can listen to both of them, and there's a lot of compare and contrast there, in probably many ways. But there's also a lot of continuity that I think you might find really interesting. So, again, thanks, buddy. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks everybody for listening.
All right.